Welcome to the second episode of the Countdown of MonteCristo. As you can see, I've been hard at work trying to implement some of the changes that you guys suggested to me on Twitter and on Reddit, so I hope you like the graphics. We're still getting things rolling a little bit here, so it will take some time for some of the changes to be added, but we should have some scoreboards in today, make it a little more visually appealing for you guys, and hopefully we can start adding more clips in the future. Shout out to Frost Ryan from the Brazilian server for his assistance in getting graphics running for me, and so we'll be moving on from there. Also, thanks to Drexen and Kelsey Moser for talking to me about some of the Chinese games for today, and thanks to Deficio, who had a chat with me about the SK lane swap, which we'll be talking about later in the SK versus Elements game. There will be timestamps below the YouTube video, and then also the list of VODs, of course, after that. So if you want to check out those, go ahead and watch the games. If not, we're going to be going over the top 6. So this is the spoiler-free zone. So this week we're going to be looking at and discussing briefly Fnatic versus Unicorns of Love as number 6. Number 5 will be TSM versus Impulse. Number 4, OMG versus IG. That's a 2-game series. Number 3 is Elements versus SK. Number 2, another 2-game series, King versus IG from the LPL. And number 1 from this past week, gotta be Jin Air versus CJ from Champions in Korea. So now, that's the spoiler-free zone. So spoilers from this point out as we start to go over and dissect some of these games. So first off, I was a little hesitant about putting this one on here. As we check out the Fnatic versus Unicorns of Love. Oop, let me fix this real quick for you guys. As we move this on up. I was a little hesitant about putting this on the list in particular, just because I do think that it wasn't necessarily the strongest game, and it was a lot of mistakes from Fnatic that did result in the win. But ultimately, since we discussed Fnatic last week, and I do think that it showcases some of both their strengths and their weaknesses at the current time, that is worth putting on here, just because I did think that Fnatic, generally speaking, is not going to be as strong as the season progresses due to some of these warding and other various weaknesses that they have. So looking at this game, basically, you see some of the rewards that Reignover and Huni have been able to get due to some very aggressive styles of play, but they do tend to play a very high-risk style, and Unicorns of Love was really, really good at punishing that come the late game. Now, as we can see here, Unicorns were running basically this composition that was great at creating picks. They had Fizz top, Ahri mid, and then the jungle Nidalee, which is becoming more of an interesting skirmish pick. So they have this highly focused skirmish composition, able to get those assassinations. Fnatic really dropped the ball in terms of warding in the late game, and even at some of the team fights around the Dragons, you could really see how well Unicorns of Love were doing at splitting the wombo combo of Fnatic up. So they couldn't get good Annie or Gnar initiations right there, and then they were able to create little individual skirmishes. So creating picks, fighting around the periphery, and Fnatic really didn't have a warding answer in the late game, so they got caught out without vision multiple times, which allowed a big comeback, even though Vivin played very well. So from this point forward, Fnatic really has to look at more serious warding and sticking to their team comps. But as it went, I really liked how Unicorns of Love stuck to their game plan, stuck to their win conditions in this match, didn't despair despite being down a pretty significant amount, and then forced the fights that they wanted and the style of fights that they knew they could win. So this is a great example of some of those games that I really like, where we see two very different styles of composition. Fnatic going for the big, more wombo combo AoE type of plays, and then Unicorns of Love trying to force out some more of these little skirmishes, little pick plays. And so there's a really good dynamic where Fnatic gets their way early, Unicorns of Love gets their way late, and then we see it progress into a UOL win. So number 5 on our list will be TSM versus Impulse. Overall, this was a pretty weak week. Yes, we'll just use the different spellings on that. For North America. not particularly impressive. I feel like it's mostly just TSM and CLG crushing people in the laning phase and then just snowballing that into a win, and that most of the other NA teams are rather sloppy and discombobulated, playing without a distinct game plan or just straight up losing their lanes to these teams. The difference here is I think that why I picked the TSM game this week is I really thought their draft was a lot better. Overall, the Ahri first pick in the current patch is very strong, and also if you have a very good Ahri player who you're confident into any matchup, like apparently TSM is with Bjergsen, then why not go ahead and first pick it and take that away? Of course, he did get that big kill onto Xiao Weixiao in the mid lane, which allowed him to snowball. And CLG's game, well, some of their games, while they were very dominant, I wasn't as big a fan of their draft. So TSM here, as you can see on your screen, they ran this sort of combination hybrid pick and teamfight composition. They're able to get into the back lines. Why Impulse would pick Graves into this is a bit of a mystery to me. I think it's kind of a sitting duck for the Vi Ahri combo, but due to the low range. But beyond that, TSM, this is just a really good example of how to take a small lead and snowball it very methodically into objectives while constantly putting pressure on the map. I'm still skeptical of TSM's ability to play from behind, but they haven't really had to yet because they have been so dominant in the laning phase. So that's why, good game to take a look at if you like some very aggressive snowballing. Very short game, under 30 minutes, but a decisive win for TSM and worth taking a look at. So let's move on to OMG versus IG. Now, this is a 1-1 split between IG and OMG, and I'm only going to show you the scoreboard for the first game here, but we'll discuss the second one as well. So, IG versus OMG. Obviously, OMG has been doing very well in the LPL, even though they have had some pretty noticeable weaknesses so far, particularly in their warding. And sort of like TSM and SK, I feel that they've been skating by on having very dominant laning phases and really good early game play in terms of taking skirmishes and turning that into objectives. However, OMG's flaws really begin to show in the late game, where they sort of fall apart in terms of wards. I mean, a lot of the players hold on to 1 to 2 Doran's items in the late game instead of swapping them out for vision, to the degree that OMG has hardly any wards on the map in the late game in this one. And yes, they're able to acquire an early lead because they do have this very skirmish 1v1 sort of composition going with Rengar, Aurelia, and Vayne. But in the end, their lack of warding on the flanks allows IG to come in, get some very good Lee Sin kicks straight into Yasuo ults with a lot of Maokai AoE, and so they find themselves caught out in a bunch while getting quite easily in fact, engaged on from the flank. So this is sort of, I believe this should be a sort of wake-up call, or I hope it is a wake-up call for OMG to start playing out strategies a little bit more cleanly, because they do have some pretty obvious and exploitable flaws, even for a team that individually, player for player, is not as skilled as them in IG. Yes, IG have Kakao and Rookie, but all the lanes are pretty much powerhouses for OMG, and they haven't been, I think, working on some of their flaws seriously enough. Now, that said, they still can do enormous damage snowballing from the laning phase, as we see in Game 2. OMG just goes off. I mean, Cool goes nuts on LeBlanc as like a 17-kill LeBlanc game. So that one's fun just from a pure individual play perspective. But I do like the tension in this game between IG's more thoughtful engages and finding the teamfights they're going to win, even at a deficit, compared to OMG, where you see the good individual outplay in the first game and then it fall apart, and then coming through very strongly in the second game. So there's a good tension, I think, between strategies there as well. So moving on to number 3 this week, SK versus Elements. These are more than likely going to be the top 2 teams in Europe, barring any surprises. Most likely those surprises will come from Roccat, if they're going to come from anybody. If Roccat can get the lineup that they have that looks so strong on paper into a more functional state than it is currently. But I think this was just really a great demonstration of why SK is the best Western team. as well as some flaws that Elements has. So I talked to Deficio about this, and I'm sure he'll do a much more thorough job explaining it on the LCS broadcast this weekend. But the SK lane swap comes into full effect here. We don't see many teams doing, / really any teams doing what we call the SK lane swap. And what that is basically Freddy doing a camp by himself, getting to level 2, recalling, and then immediately teleporting back into lane. Now, as Deficio pointed out, and we'll point out to you guys, this does have some weaknesses to it in terms of Freddy is very ambushable if you get some good wards in, if you know that this lane swap is coming. And in fact, in this game, something that Deficio mentioned to me that I went back and reviewed was that, in fact, Elements did have a ward at Raptors, and Freddy's Azir got down to like 60 HP, and had Nif been there to harass him to any degree whatsoever, Freddy would either not have gotten level 2 or like literally straight up died. So you can abuse this for First Blood, or you can set up kind of a 4-man dive or a 3-man dive as soon as he teleports into lane, because you know he's going to do that. So people need to start playing around SK style and exploiting its weaknesses in order for them to stop doing this. And we just didn't see that, even though in this game Elements had the information necessary to do so. So SK did get a little bit of an advantage out of the lane swap, and they did have the superior lane swap here, but we see traditional Elements. How did they get ahead in the early game? It's due to Shook playing quite well. Did manage to pull off some good plays on the Rengar, and then it kind of all fell apart. There was a major overextension from Elements that cost them a few deaths, and then SK was able to turn things back around. So this game's fun because it's really back and forth. You see that Elements they rely a little bit on the playmaking ability from Shook, and do get a little bit confused about how to deal with some more advanced map movement. SK showing some innovation in terms of their lane swap strategies, and also, critically, SK showing that you really can't make very many mistakes against them right now, or they will punish you really hard. And that's really the key when we look at good teams, is what do they do when they're behind? SK capitalized very heavily on Elements' mistake and turned it into a win in the end. So, and a very decisive win as well. I mean, this game's only 35 minutes long, and for a lot of it, Elements was looking like a strong contender, but SK was able to turn it and close it like that. So really nice stuff, I think, from SK, showing why right now, in my mind, they are pretty definitively the best Western team, and it's not really by a close margin either. So impressive from them. So let's talk about LGD versus King. Now this may surprise people that this match is so good, because King has been a bit of a bottom tier / lower mid tier LPL team. LGD is pretty firmly mid tier right now. So it is a bit shocking that this game ended up being as entertaining and in some ways like high level as it was. What I really, really liked about this series is LGD, there's such different styles at play. And for me, again, like that's one of the key things that makes fun games to watch, is that LGD is going for cross-map objectives in this game. They are, anytime King tries to make a move or to get a gank off, LGD is immediately there. They're the ones taking the early dragons. They're the ones who are just gobbling up towers. We also see a little bit of an example of a fast push strategy from King here. So in these two games, King uses some pretty similar compositions. In game 1 that you're looking at right now, and it is a 2-0 for King, King uses Rumble, Vi, Fizz, Sivir. Now in game 2, they use Rumble, Vi, Zed, Sivir. So you're looking at a lot of mid-game power here. Obviously, Fizz and Zed are going to fall off once QSS comes into play, but it doesn't really get to that point where several people have QSS. Obviously, you see Imp had one by the end of this game. But it's about abusing the mid-game power spike. So in these games, you see LGD jump out to these very early leads, either through dragons, usually in terms of gold, because they're punishing King pretty hard. King is trying for the fast push in the early games. They want that early gold to start the snowball. They figure they'll get the dragons later, or they'll just win with this massive Vi, Renekton, and then Zed or Fizz mid-game power spike. But the key here, and what's so interesting about this, is yes, King has bad warding. Yes, King is overly aggressive in terms of taking fights from time to time. But King's team fighting with these compositions is beautiful. Especially in this first game, Imp is very far up on this Kalista. Obviously, Imp, an extremely good AD carry player. But Skyland's great equalizers. MLXG gets into the back line. Assassin, and they use the Sivir speed just to immediately get into the back line and start taking out Wayless and Imp. And it is very precise, so clean, and really impressive to see this King team fight so well. They know what their power spike is. They go in at the right times, even with a gold deficit, knowing that they're still as strong just due to their champion combination at that point in the game, if not stronger, even though they don't have as many items. And they absolutely dominate LGD. And LGD kind of doesn't know what to do because their backline is getting eliminated so incredibly quickly. So if you want to see really fantastic team fighting and a very precise execution of a mid-game power spike up against some more tactical play from LGD and actually have like that really aggressive team fighting style win 2 games in a row, really good game to watch. There's a lot to be learned, I think, about team fighting, particularly from Assassin, because team fighting with champions like Zed and Fizz is not the easiest thing to do properly, because you always run the risk of getting blown up before you can deal any damage. So great, really great game, really great series, very entertaining, and probably some of the best like both of these teams have played. Again, King's warding will hurt them, I think, against more coordinated, like, single-language teams. LGD still trying to get into the groove right there. But very, very good. And finally, our number 1 game of the week will be Jin Air versus CJ. So, game 1 here is... I mean, GBM, for my money, is one of the best Xerath players in the world. I'll say the best. I mean, there are some good ones like Baka in China, and obviously Easyhoon and Faker and Frozen, but GBM is just sensational on this champion. Has repeatedly blind picked it, found ways to win around it. And what's so interesting here is that we have 2 poke compositions going against each other. And by the way, you really have to commit to watching this game because, as you can see, it is nearly 80 minutes long. It is one of the longest professional League of Legends games ever played. It has the highest CS total. Coco broke Robert Exley's CS total, and Space tied it in this game. So we're talking about a very long game, but it really isn't boring. The thing about this is Coco does great on this J. Space is playing very well on Corki. They have an earlier power spike with their poke composition. But the problem is that it's mostly, by the time late game teamfights are up, CJ is mostly attack damage, whereas the mixed damage coming out of Jax, Hurricane, Kalista, and GBM Xerath, where you have more of a balance between AP and AD, is able to carry the day at the end. As you can see, there's like double thorn mails and stuff that were really causing a lot of problems for Coco and Space when they were trying to reliably deal damage. And this is not a boring game. It's not like nobody's attacking each other. It's like every objective for 80 minutes is contested, constant poke wars, insane skill shot accuracy from both teams. There is just this really beautiful tension, and I like, as many of you know, I love low kill, high strategy games, and both teams played this game so well. It's really just a pleasure to watch it. There's so much going on strategically, and Jin Air is able to edge it, I think, due to the mixed damage of their team composition and slightly better objective play in the end. But very, very entertaining. Game number 2 is a lot shorter, but in that game, we do see Trace on Rumble, and Trace's Rumble was punished very early by CJ, but he manages to do so much work with Rumble in terms of using great equalizers and presenting a big zoning threat. And also, they kill Coco so many times with Xerath Rumble by laying down an equalizer in the backline and then having Xerath immediately ult and kill Coco. So if you want to see some very nice team fighting, that's a little bit more unorthodox and uses a more mid-game timing. That one's really fun to watch as well, to show how to take out some of these long-range, less mobile poke champions like Jace in the backline. So that one's shorter, much more clean. The first game's very clean play too, but more snowball-oriented play, I will say, from Janair. But first game, absolute beauty, back and forth, CJ advantage, and then a very, very like tension-filled, long game that culminates in a Janair win. So those are pretty much going to do it for this week. Try and keep it short and sweet, as you guys wanted. Obviously, I will be upgrading the show a little bit. Feel free to hit me up at GGC MonteCristo on Twitter if you have further suggestions for anything, really. Obviously, we'll be trying to level up the show. I will be taking a break next week, as Champions will be off for Lunar New Year, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break. So you won't see me next week. I'm sorry you have to figure out what games to watch on your own. I know it's going to be difficult, but we'll be roaring back the week after that. So I will see you guys then. Thanks a lot for watching.